Today, the talk is called A Compassionate Response, Greed, and Consumerism. And I'm getting the talk out of this book here, The Future is Now, or The Heart is Noble by Gyalwang Karmapa. And that is the title of a chapter. So that's where I'm getting the title from. And the book is a series of talks he gave to American college students in 2011. They went over on a sabbatical. And the book is full of his thoughts on various current issues. I gave a talk on gender identities, and that's one of the chapters. He talks about the environment. So today I'm going to talk about greed and consumerism. And the subtitle of this chapter is Contentment is the Best Wealth. So he begins with saying that we all have the potential to relate to things differently and to modify our relationships with our belongings and our relationship to our shared culture. And again, he was addressing American college students. So when he says our shared culture, there's both a world culture, there's a Western culture, and then there is the American culture. And I'm thinking that at the broadest, it would have been the Western culture, highly developed countries. And he says it's up to us to actively limit our own greed. And greed is a very kind of nasty sounding word, but he uses it over and over again in this chapter. And that is an important point to understand the difference between happiness and material wealth. And that these two are not synonymous. There are lots of wealthy people that are very unhappy. And there are lots of people that do not have a lot of wealth that are happy and content. So the problem is very important today because we're running out of resources. There's climate change. Hurricane Ida is a very good example of climate change. That the present lifestyle of people, not only in the United States, but across the globe, is unsustainable. And as a result, the problem involves us as we are all consumers. It's not, well, this problem belongs to corporations or billionaires or whatever, that because of interdependence, this problem belongs to all of us, as we all our actions influence the environment, resources, and so forth. Now, because of globalization, he points out that the world, there's more desire throughout the world to be like the United States or other highly developed countries. But that governments and laws are not the whole answer. Most governments and the laws that they pass are, he feels, selective in terms of what needs to be changed. And we can't really pass our responsibility on to someone else or another organization or government. So he feels we can't count on governments to make positive change. And about corporations, he says they exist to make money, not to generate happiness. So he uses the example of a house, that if you damage a beam in one room of the house, and this would be a house, Tibetan style house where there are beams, it makes the whole structure unstable. And again, that's this idea of interdependence. And this global warming and environmental change is really a very good example of that, what is emitted in terms of greenhouse gases anywhere in the world can have an effect anywhere in the world. It doesn't stay in the location where it was created. On the other hand, even though we are part of the problem, as a result, we can help make changes that he feels that we ordinary human beings have much more power than we think we do in this area and lots of other areas. He uses the example of a bodhisattva, where a bodhisattva is a being that has this aspiration bodhicitta to benefit all beings and to travel the path in order for him to be able to lead all beings to liberation, to permanent happiness. And that we need more people like that in the world today, whether you are a Buddhist or from another religion or have no religion, that we need people that want to work for the benefit of others, to work for change. And of course, when we work for change to benefit others, we also benefit, because when the environment is improved, everybody benefits from it. When there are fewer greenhouse gases emitted, everybody benefits. He feels the first step is self-education. And what that means is understand clearly why we need to have a change of course. Understand about global warming, that it is not a myth. It is not something that's a conspiracy theory. It is real. Same thing for scarce resources. That clean water, clean air that you can breathe. When you are over in India and China and other parts of that area of the world, there is a huge amount of smog caused by burning of coal and automobile exhausts and so forth. So we need to understand what the problem is, and then understand how what we can do to alleviate this problem. And he says that really part of understanding how to alleviate it is understanding greed, the nature of greed, and especially our own greed, and why it is so destructive. It's easy to see greed in other people. It's much more difficult to see it in ourselves. So when you see it in others, that's the time to pause and look within and see, have I ever done this kind of activity or talked this way and so forth. It's interesting how we tend to see our own flaws in other people. So ask yourself, am I like that? Otherwise, we can fall into a very arrogant state of mind and thinking that person is greedy. Boy, am I glad I'm not greedy. So we want to avoid going that direction. So building a life or a society on greed will lead to dissatisfaction. On the other hand, greed is not inherent to us. It's just another afflictive state of mind. And greed is what leads one to rebirth in the Preta realm. And since it's not inherent in us, it is interdependent. And as a result, it can be reduced and it can be eliminated. That what maintains greed is habituation, that we just get used to buying things and wanting more. And he says that there's plenty in our culture that encourages it. Advertising, the behavior of others, our own desire for happiness. And of course, this is one thing that is understood by corporations and their advertising agencies, is that present the product that they are trying to sell to make money as something that will cause happiness. But on the other hand, greed makes us unhappy, that we don't see what we have and we see what we don't have. And that just causes dissatisfaction and unhappiness. So to go on in this direction, he talks about the deceptive nature of appearances, that basically what he is saying is that we see things as separate objects that are solid rather than interdependent. So what we do is we take that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be an other. And we think both are solid and real. And so we think outer appearances are solid and real. And then on top of that, as I mentioned, he talks about advertising and about those around us and how we just get, you might say, sucked in. It's amazing how with a cell phone that if you receive a message, it'll make a little noise or vibrate or whatever, unless you turn that off, that the cell phones kind of draw you into using them more than you would. And then, of course, the newest shiny cell phone comes out, and you feel you have to get it, that your present one is inadequate because the newer one can do more things. And we're constantly bombarded online with advertising of happy people doing happy things with products that are supposed to make us happy. So it's interesting. I ordered some new checks recently, and they came, and of course with them was on the packet was a picture of a younger woman that was very happily writing out a check. And that's what he's talking about here, is that we are bombarded with all these very beautiful professional quality of photos of very happy people, usually dressed well and healthy and even young and fit and so forth. And it just is giving us these subtle messages of buy, buy, buy. You're not happy now, but if you buy this, you'll be happier. So he says that we need a clear awareness of how greed works, and to, as a result, protect ourselves from being deceived by greed, deceived by our misapprehension of phenomena and appearances. Quote, greed has no limits of its own. It is something we ourselves must recognize, counteract, and actively limit. So once we understand how greed works, we can then counteract it with our inner wisdom and understand what real success is and what personal value is and where they come from. When talking about greed, a short story by Mark Twain came to mind. I don't remember the title of the short story, but it was, of course, written probably around 1900 and maybe a little earlier. And it was about two men that were collectors. And what they collected was the land that had the best echoes. This is a humorous story, of course. And so they traveled the country, and when they found a place that had a fantastic echo, they would buy it. And the two got in competition over this one plot of land. And one got it, and the other was jealous. And so what he did was that the cliff that the sound would bounce off was not on the land the man bought. So the jealous echo collector bought that land and hired contractors to tear the cliff down. So Karmapa says we want to make change heroic, or wanting to change is heroic, that you're going against a lot of forces in society and in the world. And so it's heroic in that way, that it's a certain there's a fearless quality about it, courageous. So we need to clearly distinguish between what we actually need to be happy and what we merely want. And to do this before buying, even before you go into the store or get online, step back for a moment and ponder it. Why do you want it? He says, frequently we just grab and grasp at things without thought, like a baby grasping for a toy. So we need to distinguish whether we want it or need it. And then what is the real function for this object? Does this object fulfill a valid function? And very important, he feels, is durability. How long lasting is the object? A lot of things nowadays are intended to just be used and thrown away quickly, and then you buy another one. He says this helps us avoid being a puppet of greed. In other words, that instead of us controlling greed, greed controls us and turns us into a puppet. So we need to have this honest introspection combined with basic intelligence, our wisdom, our inner wisdom. And then we need to take into consideration the effects on the environment of whatever it is that we are buying. Here is a long quote, but I think it's worth repeating. This is on page 64 of my edition of the book. To the degree that greed controls us, we are basically living inside a cage created by our own selfishness. It is like when a person is placed in jail. Only a few visitors can gain entry, a few family members or close friends, and the prisoner is otherwise cut off from the outside world. In a similar way, our own self-centeredness also locks us away in a sort of prison. It lets in just a few people that we recognize as important to our well-being, my family or my friends. Then it keeps everyone else at a distance. It leaves us feeling disconnected, cut off, alone. Our self-absorption severely impedes our awareness of others. It hampers a sense of closeness to other people and blinds us to the ties of interdependence that always connect us to one another. End quote. So we need to take a broader view. We need to see the interconnections between us and everyone else in the world. We need to look deeply. So he has a contemplation about an item that you might want to buy, and he just uses a backpack as an object of contemplation. And he's talking about to a group of young people, college students, and they probably all have backpacks. Maybe we have other objects that we could use. But the contemplation is the same no matter what the object is. So the first point is that the object is made out of parts. And that each part was made by people. And the resources for each part came from the earth. And then people made the machines that were used to make these parts and assemble the parts. And so there was shipping involved, designers, truck drivers, shop owners, salespeople, clerks and cashiers, accountants, insurance providers, inspectors. And we could make a very long list if we went on and on and on and on and on. But I will just end that list at that point. But the point is then that there was a technology that was developed over millennia. Original people talk about the stories about the discovery of fire. Well, we had to discover fire and how to create it before a backpack could be created. And on and on and on. And so there is this interdependence of technology that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And then all these people that are involved, they needed food, clothing, and shelter. And other people produced those, and more technology was needed. The point being that if we look at things this way, it leads us to being grateful to others, feeling connected to them through their work. And for many, it may have been hard work. Some may have worked very happily, and some may have suffered from low pay, harsh or unsafe conditions, and so forth. So through this contemplation, we can connect to the happiness and the suffering of others that is involved in the product that we want to buy. And quite honestly, this can also lead to a feeling of gratitude. So also consider the cost to the planet and to others of this item before you buy it. And again, to remember this interdependence. So this can cause us to connect with other people, to cause our love and affection for other people to grow, because we realize that we are benefiting from their activity. We will probably never meet these people, but we're definitely benefiting from their activity. He feels that by doing this, this makes it easier to be a responsible agent of change. So then he goes on and talks about happiness. And says we should ask ourselves this question: are we looking for happiness in what we own? Are we just accumulating stuff? Do we want to be well off or happy? Do we know the difference even between the two? So he tells a story. And it's the story of a rich man and a beggar. The beggar had a little shack that was next to the rich man's mansion. And the beggar would come home at the end of the day from begging, and he was happy and he would sing at night. And the rich man, meanwhile, was counting up his money and calculating what he would do with it, and so forth. Well, the rich man became curious over time. You know, why is this man that has nothing, that's a beggar, singing at night? So one day, while the beggar was out begging, he put a large gold bar in the shack of the beggar to see how the beggar would react to that. So the beggar returned and found the gold bar. And then he started thinking, well, I guess I could sell it and then I would have all this money. And then he thought, well, I could build a home, I could take vacations, I could save, I could have children and pay for their needs, and on and on and on. And he forgot to sing. He forgot about being happy. So the point that the Karmapa is making here is that in pursuing happiness, frequently the happiness gets lost. that happiness comes from within. If you're not happy before you get what you want, you won't be happy afterwards, at least not for long. And of course, when that happiness that you experience when you get what you want disappears, then you just have to go after, I need to have more of what I want. So it is very important to see this relationship that there's nothing that limits our desire besides ourselves limiting our desire, saying enough is enough, or I only need a little bit. Now, it is a problem. It's going in the wrong direction. If we look at material things, our job and so forth, as who we are, that's our value, how we fit into the world. The same thing could be said for our family even. It's important to take care of our family, but the point is that's not who we are. That it's so easy to engage in what he calls mindless conformity, herd mentality, with fashion, for instance, even fitting in with the family, that we have to make the right decisions, and these are our own decisions, rather than just going along with the crowd. And speaking about family and fashion, an image came to mind that the last time I was in Tibet, we traveled with, I think they were some relatives of Lama Karma, and these were Tibetans, men and women, and they were dressed in traditional Tibetan garb. Yet one of the women had what looked to me like a designer handbag. So even the Tibetans can fall prey to this idea of fashion, and that you're happier if you have something that is fashionable that you're wearing. He talks about how in the West, in the modern world, we live by the clock and keep busy. And we keep looking for things to keep us busy. Chogyam Trungpa said that it's like we are afraid if we let the engine of the car idle, it will die. So we just keep on moving around, busy, busy, busy. And Karmapa says that we have made ourselves into slaves of what we have created. When he grew up as a young boy in Tibet, there was storytelling at night, time to enjoy each other's company. And here we constantly seek entertainment and distraction. So it's very important to understand the difference between doing and being, that we can identify with our own inner qualities, our inherent love, our inherent compassion, our inherent wisdom, and on and on and on. We have plenty of inner qualities. Or we can identify with our job, our money, our possessions, and so forth. And that is up to us to decide. So the choice he feels is our inner qualities and our inner happiness and contentment, or our job, our money, our possessions. And this is one reason why we meditate, and that's the difference between doing and being. When we meditate, we let ourselves be. We try to the best of our ability to let go of doing and just let ourselves be and experience perhaps only a moment or two of calmness, but to have the opportunity to experience calmness. So he finishes up this chapter with a section called The Greatest Wealth, Contentment. Quote, we can gain it simply by mining our own mental resources and knowing our own mind. So we need to cultivate this perspective that we have enough, that we don't need more to be satisfied, that we can be happy with what we have. Mindfulness is an important tool in this, that just paying attention to what's going on in the moment. He specifically talks about the breath and talks about an experience he had recently when he was out walking and enjoying the breath, and did a little contemplation about where the oxygen that is why we're breathing comes from. It comes from, of course, plants. We can't produce oxygen. Plants produce oxygen. And feel joy at realizing that you are breathing in what plants exhale, you might say. And you have this connection to the plant world. So with mindfulness, we come to see, and he uses the word marvels. We come to experience these little marvels of the world all the time. It's happening all the time. You could say it's taking time to smell the flowers. He says that the basic necessities for life are here, that the natural environment can be a source of, quote, endless joy. So instead of taking the natural environment, breathing, and so forth for granted, develop appreciation and joy in what you are experiencing, not only in the natural environment, but also in the human environment and when you're with other people. And he says, quote, we can find boundless happiness in simply breathing. So I want to end this story with this teaching with a story about my grandmother and her childhood. She was born in 1896 to a couple that were farmers down in the Madison area. And farming was very difficult in around 1900, 1910, 1915, when I think she was married by the time she was 19. And she talked very kindly and lovingly about those years of her life. And she had a lot of older brothers. She was the youngest, and talked about them and their teams of horses and so on and so forth. Yet I have a house that was built around 1895, and Grandma's house, do not know if her father built it, but she was the youngest of 10 children. And if it was built, it would have been much older than mine, could have been easily 20 years older than mine. And if it was a house that existed and they bought it, then it could easily have been older than that. There are a lot of old farms down on that part of the state. I will say this, old for this part of the country, not for the East Coast. But anyway, I know what my house was like when it was built, which was no insulation, windows that were not weather stripped, that would rattle when the wind blew. No electricity, no running water, no internet. There could have been a crank telephone, no cars, pickup trucks. Everything had to be hauled by horses. All the heavy work had to be done by horses. And then the horses needed to be fed. The manure had to be cleaned out. And on and on and on. Oh, yes, in an outhouse, of course, no indoor plumbing. I have heard stories from people much older than me, and they are long gone since then, that lived in these old farmhouses. And it was common to have a bowl and a pitcher of water for in the morning you would wash up, and that you would get up in the morning sometimes and there would be ice in the pitcher of water, that kind of cold. And yet Grandma talked about how much she liked her child and how happy it was. So it's really important to understand that the way things are is not solid, and that we can look at things differently and change. The question is, how come there was no mention of you're going to leave it all behind when you die and enter the bardo and it's totally useless? I am going to kind of speculate here a little bit. The whole book is very light on Buddhism. And he was talking to American college students that probably almost all of them were not Buddhist. And so he was talking more about what can be done in the present time rather than looking at future lives. But it is true that when we die, we leave a pile of stuff behind. And quite a few years ago, my wife and I, my former wife and I, separated, and we had collected a huge amount of stuff. I was not a Buddhist at this time. I was not a Buddhist at this time. And so we had an auction. And I was surprised at how little interest people had in my really valuable stuff. It was a very good lesson that other people don't look at my stuff as being all that valuable as I do. And then what brought me to Buddhism was when my best friend died in an accident suddenly. And while I wasn't thinking about leaving my property behind, I was thinking that, boy, it could have happened to me, that I have no control over how long I am going to live or the circumstances of my death. So it's very, very good to consider that you're going to leave it behind anyway. And it could be a burden to whoever ends up with it. I feel sorry for whoever has to empty my barn. The question was about the explosive population growth that seems to have as much as greed demand on the natural resources. And there's no question about it that just the sheer number of people on the planet is taxing the resources, because they too want to be consumers like we in the West. And there are, of course, plenty of companies out there that will want to make money by selling these, you might say, shiny objects of happiness. That's my own term. But, and it is a problem. This is my personal solution, and that is more monks and nuns and more a gay marriage. But other than that, he doesn't talk a lot about the population problem in this book. The Buddhist perspective on abortion was the question. What is the Buddhist perspective on abortion? Traditionally, it is considered taking life, that life begins with the union of the sperm and the egg, and consciousness enters at that point. Now, and that's the way Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche talked about it. I know the Dalai Lama has said that in some cases, it might be a compassionate thing to do. Now, this is an experience that I had. And I was in Taiwan, and there was this organization, that Buddhist organization. It was Mahayana Chinese Buddhism. And they had temples all over the island. And we went to, I don't know, it might have been their headquarters. I'm thinking it was their headquarters. And in this large building or complex, in the basement of one of these buildings, they had a number of rooms. One room was names of aborted children that had been aborted or had died very young. The next was a room that was dedicated to these dead children, and it was filled with children's toys, and it had a TV on that had children's Buddhist TV programs, cartoons, and so forth. In another room, there was a table, a round table, that was set up with food, with meals in it. And this was dedicated to these dead children. And then the food that, of course, was not eaten, they would take it out to where they kept domestic animals that were destined for being killed. And they would feed it to them, like ducks, geese, pigs, and so forth. And it really, for me, was a very powerful experience going there and seeing what they were doing for the, you might say, the consciousness of these children that died young or were aborted.